Great. Well, hello, everyone who's watching this. Good to join you. My name's Nicole Jones-Qandah, Director of World Partners, and I'm joined here by two friends who I hope would introduce themselves. We have Alison, Lefebvre, and Gavin Wark with us. Gavin, could you just explain how you're connected to us?
Well, good friends for sure. I've worked with both of you in different contexts. I'm working right now with Royal City Mission as pastor of spiritual formation, and also doing some work for the denomination, helping to navigate difficult conversations.
Good to have you with us, Gavin.
Thank you.
Alison, could you introduce yourself to us, please?
I feel the same way. Um, so grateful for friendship with the two of you and the work that we've been able to do together and having this conversation. So I continue to hold credentials with the EMCC and kind of serve as a representative with the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada um, as part of the Seven Commitments Working Group, working to engage well with the conversation around reconciliation.
Awesome. Well, it's good to be here with the both of you. And those of you that are watching will notice that Gavin has a beautiful background behind him. And Alison and I are both sort of repping orange shirts from a lovely artist named Michelle Stoney. And Gavin, I just wonder, could you explain your background to those of us that are watching this conversation?
This is actually some artwork done by a fellow First Nations fellow by the name of Martin Knowles. I found it when I was looking for some artwork, and this struck me as quite beautiful. So I thought I'd use it for background today.
Awesome. I'm hoping that sets the stage for the conversation we're trying to have together today. And we're obviously looking to do some meaningful reflection and conversation ahead of National Truth and Reconciliation Day. And so I would just invite those of you that are watching to sort of enter into this conversation with us as friends and maybe considering what this might look like for you. And we're grateful as members of the EMCC to be trying to resource this conversation for you. So towards the end of our time together, we'll share maybe a few ways that we hope you'll engage with us on September 30th and in the days leading up to it. Alison, I just would invite you to share some of the things that you've been learning as you've been engaging in this for a long time.
I think that what came out for you and I, as we were talking a little while ago, is the challenge of what to do with all the information. Because particularly in the last year and a half or so, right, there's just been more information, confirmation of burial sites, for example, discussions of residential schools. The Pope came, right? It's just there's been a lot of things to try and keep up with and navigate, and it just can become overwhelming, and it's weighty stuff. It's not fluffy stuff. It's weighty, and we have a sense because, like you said, we are people who seek to walk the Jesus way. We have a sense that this is important and we need to engage with it. But so what do we do? How do we manage all this information? And so for as this day that we know is very important comes, how do we navigate? How do we manage that weight of that? And so I have found in conversations with different groups of people, it's just sometimes what happens when we feel that sense of overwhelm is we shut down and we step back, right? And so what can we kind of employ or make use of that helps us stay engaged in the conversation? And so we're going to work our way, the three of us, through three different kind of tools that could be helpful for us. And so the first tool that we can use is that our ability to ponder, right? Rather than stepping away, stay engaged. That's the model that Jesus gave us, right? Jesus stepped toward people. He stepped toward the leper, and he stepped toward the woman with the issue of blood. He chose intentionally to go through Samaria so he could meet with a woman at a well, right? So that's our example. And so ponder means that we not just ask the questions, but we take the time to consider something deeply and thoughtfully. That's the definition. And so conversations, definitely when we're starting to talk about reconciliation, it gives us this opportunity to ponder, to allow ourselves to ask questions. You're not going to find answers to all the questions that you have. There's too many. There's a lot to learn, but ask them anyways. And that ability to stay present, listening, willing to learn, and then considering what it might mean for us and what it might mean for others. Ponder means that we resist our impulse to pass judgment, um, to come to draw conclusions, right? Um, and sometimes what we have to do, what we're pondering and listening to, is what's going on um, in ourselves. Why do I have a knot in my stomach? Why do I feel squirmy? Why do I want to run? I have had to loop around a block at different times in my life as I've been learning, just because I wasn't sure how to process. Maybe we're overwhelmed with sorrow, with grief. Maybe we're angry, right? So those are things to notice. Be curious about. Name it if you can. Pay attention to it, um, even if it's ugly, right? I often say that it's very common to not know what you're feeling. I call it being disrupted. Oh, I'm just disrupted, is what I now say to myself. And that word unsettled can mean to loosen, to move away from a settled state or condition is a definition that an author gave it, to perturb or agitate mentally or emotionally. Um, that kind of fits. So, one of the big barriers to listening and learning is my own need to formulate a response, um, engage my mind, and not pay attention to what's happening, come up with a solution with what I think I need to do instead of noticing my body and coming to the place that I need to realize that I don't know what I don't know.
I think that we hear action and we think it's a deliverable, but I suppose I would say that pondering deeply and willingness to enter in is action of itself. And just to encourage people that that's meaningful in its own way.
One of the things that struck me about what you were saying, Alison, was this need to get in touch with our feelings and to actually identify them. Often we push them down because we don't want to face them or we're not sure what they are, but to actually sit and be able to identify what is it that I'm feeling. Am I afraid? Am I ashamed? And once we name them, kind of bring them out into the open, then there are things that we can do with them. And if we just keep them pushed down, they're going to express themselves in other ways that are not healthy. And so it's good for us to take the time to ponder and to name, so that it's kind of like taking out the garbage before it takes us out, I would say.
Can we go back to, I think, when we were talking a bit earlier, the three of us? Gavin, you mentioned posture.
Sometimes we're so fixed on our sense of what is right and wrong, and so we want to convince everybody of our particular perspective. But we don't have the right posture. It's not a posture of compassion. It's not a posture which allows us to actually listen and hear where the other person, the other party, is actually coming from. And so when we take a step back and say, okay, I do hold these particular perspectives, I have my sense of what's right, but I have to hold on to this tentatively, and I have to admit that I may not have the whole truth. And in order for me to actually have the truth, the information I need to work with, I need to listen to you. I need to hear your story. And so rather than thinking about how I can get my perspective across, I'm just slowing down and saying, maybe I don't have all the information. Let me hear what you have to say.
To me, that feels like returning to a dependence on Jesus, right? That willingness to sit in that conversation in a way that doesn't jump to like our ideas of what's meant to be, but rather to return to dependence on Jesus and trust his spirit in those conversations as we listen to a full extent.
That pondering and inviting the spirit into the, the experience, if you want to say that, or the journey, it requires patience. So that would be the next piece I think we have to be mindful of, because we get so addicted to movement, right? We don't know how to sit with what we're learning, with what we're hearing, with what we're seeing, and we don't know how to sit and pay attention to what's going on for us. We want to spring into action, which is what I hear you saying when you're talking about posture, because sometimes we can't. Sometimes our springing into action is part of the problem, right?
Mm.
And what's required is time um, committed to listening and learning. And early on, when I was just beginning to learn, Sherry Russell, who had, was becoming a friend of mine, she said, just let the learning um, have its way with you. And that has proven to be um, really good advice. Jesus never snapped his fingers and gave us a 1, 2, 3 step to instant transformation. Our invitation was to follow. Our invitation was to learn. And Gavin, like you said, he spoke in riddles and stories. It wasn't plain, and so we had to stay with it. And so patience means I'm not going to be in a hurry. Um, I'm gonna be committed to reflecting um, and sitting in it, even if I'm uncomfortable. And the three of us had all talked a bit about one of the helpful tools that we have, even modeled through Scripture, is lament. And again, in our culture, we're not comfortable with lament. We're not comfortable necessarily acknowledging what's so heartbreaking or so difficult, or when I'm so lost and don't know what to do with what I'm learning, right? Or when I see things in myself that I really don't like, or hearing something implied about me when all I'm just trying to do is go about my day, right? So, um, all the songs and prayers that express sorrow and grief and fear, all the emotions that are completely appropriate, and learning with others and processing with others, not necessarily about what to do, but about who we are, is critical. And I think lament offers a vehicle for that, right?
Yeah, I think that the beautiful thing about lament, and going back to comments we made earlier about getting those feelings on the table, lament gives us the opportunity, even the permission to do that.
Mhm.
Even your most raw feelings. If you read through some of the Psalms, about a third of them are lament, and there's some pretty shocking things that are said in some of those Psalms. But it's not a pointless just getting this off my chest. You're actually turning your face first of all toward God and bringing these thoughts and feelings to Him, being completely honest with Him, so that you're coming face to face for yourself with what those feelings are, and then you're not in a hopeless place because you're asking the one who is all powerful to do something with that. And we don't know what God will do with that, but we know that God hears us, and that God is bringing all things to restoration. And so, the lament is powerful because it gets our feelings out on the table, and it brings us back to the fact that that we're not left in despair.
Absolutely. One of my favorite authors, Soon Chang Ra, talks about lament, and he actually talks about the absence of lament. He was saying that the absence of lament in our churches and our own practice is a loss of memory. We forget the necessity of lamenting over suffering and pain, and we can tend to forget that reality if we don't enter into it. And that, in fact, it's an invitation that we're invited into as part of our new humanity in Jesus, and how essential it is to experience reconciliation, justice, unity, peace, and love, which we all say we want to be a part of. But I found that even particularly interesting as we reflect on participating in National Truth and Reconciliation Day, that the willingness to remember and to walk in a posture of remembrance struck me as I was sort of connecting some of these dots together, how we participate in lament and what we're being asked to participate in by Indigenous peoples across Canada.
That piece about remembering is an acknowledgement that this is our story. This story belongs to all of us, right? We tend to think it's someone else's story instead of acknowledging that it actually belongs to all of us, which kind of can speak to the third little piece, which is imagination. And that seems like a funny word to pull in. But theologian Willie Jennings, he's an associate professor of theology and Black church studies at Duke. And that's his word. He wrote a book, a book that kind of sweeps you off your feet, called The Christian Imagination. And what he starts to talk about in there is imagining connection. And what does it mean for us to belong to one another? And can we imagine what a different way would look like? And that's very striking, like to think that that's a way that we can engage with some of what we're hearing, because we have great hope that there is actually a different way forward. And Jesus' life and death and resurrection ushered in a new day, a new way of being human. N.T. Wright and Switchfoot both call it that. And we are participating in the restoring and the restoring and the recreating, right? God is at work. He started at work, that work when Jesus rose from the dead. And that's what we're part of. And I find that so hopeful, full of hope. And Paul refers to us being compelled by love, by the love that was expressed in the life of Jesus, and that now we're invited into. It's beautiful. I know N.T. Wright also talks about our vocation as the image bearers of God, creative creators, imagining in the midst of this, our past, what could it mean for us to move forward in a new day, walking well together, right? And that Jesus model is one of self-giving love, right? And that we could talk a long time about reconciliation. We don't have time for that. But one of the things that we also talked about a few minutes ago was a couple of leaders who spoke to treaty. In Canada, we talk a lot about treaty. It's not the case all over the world, but we have this kind of model. And part of our struggle is that we don't know what that means. We don't know we think transaction, because that's part of our Western European history. But Indigenous people, when they hear the word treaty, they talk about it as a relational word. So Ray Eldred, an Indigenous theologian, will talk about Treaty means we dwell together well in the land as relatives. And then my friend Nora Yellowknee from up northern Alberta and Wabasca, she said to me one day, treaty is a relational word. Treaty means I care about how it is with you, and you care about how it is with me. What a beautiful um, Jesus oriented way of engaging our imagination.
I think that call that we have to follow him, but also to choose to be in unity and peacemakers with each other and those around us, sort of compels us to listen well and to consider treaty for each one of us.
When I think about what you're saying around imagination, I get excited about the possibility of imagining with others. It's tempting for me just to kind of sit in my room and imagine what the world could look like if they followed some grand scheme that I have in my head. But to sit down with another person, a First Nations person, and imagine together about what could be, that seems really, really intriguing, really exciting.
I've been asked the question several times, what does reconciliation look like? And I, I end up saying, we're making this up. Like we don't know what it looks like. And we're seeking to be led by the Spirit, shaped into the character and um, manner of Jesus and the life that he modeled for us. But we don't know. And it's not like imagination is a foreign concept, right? I was reading in Isaiah, and Isaiah was like, don't worry. Yes, it's going to be bad for a while, but then it's going to be great. And trying to give them hope and offering them an opportunity to imagine. I mean, it's just throughout our stories that are captured for us in scripture is this invitation to imagine. What did the disciples, I mean, what were they doing all the time trying to link scriptures and what they knew to what they were experiencing in the moment? And how did Paul engage all he knew and imagine, a different day forward? So we're not necessarily super imaginative all the time in our lives. Sometimes that feels ambiguous to us, but it's not. It's so grounded in the faithfulness of God and the goodness and his willingness to teach and guide us and his promise to guide us always, right?
Gavin, I appreciate your thought on imagine with, because I think that just links with what I believe God calls us to and Jesus calls us to in participating with his kingdom, which is reinforcing the contribution of others. And so how can we ponder and be patient and imagine with that humility in mind, just believing that contribution and that richness altogether is far better than us doing it alone. Mm-hmm. Although we can be so tempted towards the efficiency of that approach. And I think that just serves as a really good reminder as we walk into this conversation, but even into other conversations we're choosing to have. And Gavin, I know you're helping us facilitate and walk through some of those things together. So I'm grateful for that.
I just want to echo how important that is. That with peace. And that is perhaps one of the things that we've been missing often. Mm-hmm. We think we have to come up with a plan.
Right.
But the dance of pondering and patience and like it's not a linear step-by-step program. You don't ponder and then be patient with that pondering and then go off and imagine and then we're done, right? We know that. All of those things as they dance around together with others, I really like and appreciate that.
I also think just on that last note of imagination, it points to a generosity just a generosity to consider what might be possible when we're all together, the generosity to incorporate others. And I even think as we sort of talk about pondering and talk about patience, there's a willingness to believe that there's, a generous amount of time. We often think of time as this limited resource, and to some degree that can feel really true, but how to just be, engage in a generous posture and believe we can give the appropriate time to this process.
The conversation itself, the with piece, the imagining together, is part of the solution. It's probably a bigger part of the answer than jumping to a final answer, right? It's working together in relationship, and it is important that we come to some conclusions, but we lose a lot if we hurry to get there.
And I think on that note, it's been great to walk through these pieces with both of you, and just to having digested that in this conversation and in previous conversations. And I would hope to be able to speak on behalf of us that we are excited about some resources that we're publishing to allow those of you that are listening or watching this to be able to ponder well. And so feel free to head to the Orange Shirt website that will be on this screen for some resources that you can walk through personally, or maybe in this spirit of imagining what does it look like to maybe walk through some of these resources together with those around you. And we just pray that the Spirit of Jesus would be with you and give you the ability to sit and listen and consider what might be possible in matters of walking well together with Indigenous peoples across Canada, but just walking well in these spaces of difficult conversation that Jesus calls us to engage for the purpose of demonstrating his restoration and participating with him. So I want to say thanks to these friends for their contributions and their wisdom. And we look forward to hopefully hearing from some of you that watch this and move through some reflections to what you feel the Spirit might have been saying to you. So thanks so much.